Here we are, Monday afternoon / evening on the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast and our latest episode of The Aftermath, where John and myself break down kind of what we saw, some of the sights, sounds, numbers, stats, film, all that kind of stuff. As the Bengals lose a wild heartbreaker, 26-25, last-second fashion, very much akin to, again, the results that we've seen more often than not in the Joe Burrow era between these two teams. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He is John Sheeran. John, have you caught your collective breath, I guess, after kind of what happened yesterday? It was a wild one.
It was a wild one, but there's a sense of familiarity, you know, like the Bengals and the Chiefs go back and forth. It's absolute cinematic, and it ends in familiar, I don't know if you want to say controversy, but a familiar sight. And the Bengals are 0-2. We're in our familiar, comfortable place in a very chaotic world. And I feel like there's some type of poeticism to that.
Yeah. Well, let's just get right into it. Look, I hate doing this deal, and really we're talking about it because it has been such a prevalent topic. I'm going to say this. This is not the first. You see the banner at the bottom there, officiating listed first. That is not the reason that I believe the Bengals lost. I think there was influence of the officiating there, you know, and I'm sure Chiefs people have their gripes about some calls or non-calls that were made on their players as well. Of course, I'm just going to preface the show that there were, you know, a number of different times where you go, okay, was there holding on Bengals defensive players? Was there opportunities that they could have thrown a flag and didn't? Should they have swallowed the flag at the end there, the Dijon Anthony penalty that, you know, some people are claiming that, you know, that's kind of more of a rule on a Hail Mary-ish type of play and not so much a 20-yard pass attempt. Look, once again, as you mentioned, akin to the 2022 AFC Championship game, the refs had an influence, and they had an influence at the end of the game. There is no doubt about that. And so we'll talk about the Bengals' own issues in just a second, and that is really the true reason. You can look at some of the mistakes again, in my estimation, as to why they lost, but you can't really deny the fact that, once again, the officials were pretty prevalent in this one, and prevalent late in this one.
It's a theme in the sense that when you have two teams who are very evenly matched and they're going back and forth, and there's not that much that separates one team from the other, my phone just fell, in terms of what they're doing on the field, oftentimes the refs get involved, and one decision that goes against one team becomes the talking point, and it could be vice versa, right? I think that's more common in very tight matchups in the NFL than we may think, just because we have a very centric mind on one team, and maybe just in this matchup in and of itself. But that's the danger of leaving the game to the officials, because if the roles were reversed and the Bengals were interfered on that play, I don't think there would be anything in this circle of the NFL that says that the refs may have messed up there. It's why that when the Bengals got the ball back late in the fourth quarter and they were up by 2 and the Chiefs had all their timeouts left, I even tweeted this out. If they kick a field goal, it's pretty much a punt, because you're only giving yourself a 5-point cushion to Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. If you punt, it's essentially a turnover, because you are just leaving yourself with a 2-point cushion against Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. I understand that you never want to make decisions based off of this belief that you might get screwed because you've done so before, at least in your mind. But if you believe that so strongly, then giving them the chance to do that in the first place, you're already setting yourself up for failure. The defense for the Bengals played phenomenally all game, and they deserve immense credit for that. And getting penalized in 4th and 16, whether or not it's legitimate, it's not the sole reason why they lost this game, and it shouldn't be where the absolute onus of the blame ends up on. But again, when you find yourself in that position where you can potentially put the Chiefs away, like you did 2 years ago in your own stadium on a critical 3rd and 11, where Joe Burrow threw an absolute laser dot to T. Higgins on a slant that iced the game, right? That was a situation where the Bengals knew they couldn't give the ball back to the Chiefs, and they made it happen. And they didn't make it happen this time. Mike Gesicki made a drop. Andre Oshivas made a drop. Both happened in the fourth quarter. Both happened in drives where it could have ended in points, but it didn't. And that's why the Bengals ended up in that situation.
Yeah, we'll get there in just a second, and I think the topic that bridges the officiating into mistakes and that sort of thing that the Bengals inflicted upon themselves yet again. You look at it, and Chase blows up at an official, and I think there was reason for it. I don't know what the official said back to Chase. There's some controversy there about what he potentially said to Chase to really kind of reignite the fire that was burning at the onset of a non-call of a hip drop tackle. So there may be, I don't know. I don't read lips very well, so I don't know what the official said or didn't say to Chase. Obviously, Burrow had to, kind of corral him and even push him back a couple of times, and it still escalated into a situation where a 15-yard penalty occurs, derails a drive. Who knows if the Bengals would have converted there? I think it was going to lead to a 3rd and 7 or something like that. Who knows if the Bengals would have converted there? Obviously, your chances of converting a 3rd and 7 are much higher than a 3rd and 22 or something to that effect. So that just derails things late in the game. And I understand Chase has kind of been through quite a bit emotionally with the contract situation, and he's, the Bengals are 0-1, and this is a big rivalry. He has talked about how the Bengals are the team to beat in the AFC and that sort of thing. I get all of the emotions, but unfortunately, it's a situation where the cooler heads have to prevail. You have to understand the situation. You have to understand the game, where you are in that game in terms of time in the game. And whether or not the official said something, I would hope he didn't say something that some people are accusing that official of saying, because that's not professional. But at any rate, it's easier said than done. Football's an emotional game. I get it. But cooler heads have to prevail, and you got to, if you're Jamar Chase, you can express your displeasure about a non-call and also, contain yourself and go from there. And obviously this also stems, John, the non-call from, hey, I could have been potentially really injured here, and I don't have that long-term deal in place. And I think that's ultimately where a lot of this stuff comes from.
That could just be like an origin point, I think. And it was reported before the game that, according to Adam Schefter, that Jamar Chase took out a $50 million insurance policy on himself after not reaching a contract extension with the Bengals in case of some type of a major injury, right? So when that play happened, at least from my perspective, it didn't look like it could have been a hip drop tackle. It looked definitely worse upon replay, as you could see. I believe it was his left knee that got pinned underneath Trent McDuffie, who was guarding him for most of the day. And then obviously Chase was very upset. It was, I think, also a really unique angle to see Burrow's leadership kind of unfold at that point of rushing to Chase and literally says, "Hold me back, bro, hold me back." Unfortunately, it didn't make a difference because Chase was still flagged and everything. But I know people are going to connect Chase and his contract saga with the start of the season and everything else. But I ultimately think that this matchup has always meant something to him, even from the first time where he went off for 266 yards. He's always been kind of in that side of just the intensity of the matchup, particularly against L'Jarius Sneed, and that obviously hasn't faded away with Sneed now with the Tennessee Titans. He made a statement before the game about this is an opportunity to prove yourself to the wide receiver core that you guys are that, and they're the team to be in the AFC, and they need to act like it. And for most of that game, they did. They played like the better team, and I think that was an indication of Chase not necessarily changing who he is, even if his contract situation didn't turn out the way that he wanted to. Like, he was totally in this game, And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, the box score didn't really reflect that at the end. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is just an emotional player, just letting his emotions get the best of him. And I think we can just leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, there's really not much more to say. I think the emotion was pretty understandable, but also there's the other side of the coin that, man, just the profile of the game and where you were on the game clock there, you got to be able to control some of those things, and that leads into, you look at the box score, and we could have pulled that up. We're not really going to do that. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, 151 passing yards, a couple of interceptions, almost had a third, right? And the Bengals, Trey Hendrickson had a couple of sacks on him. You had Burrow throwing for over 250, 2 touchdowns. You had Travis Kelce, one catch, 5 yards, right? I mean, the overarching, you look at it and you go, that is a masterclass on how to beat the Chiefs. That is the blueprint right there. If you have those stat lines from Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, you win that football game. And 19 points, 19 of those points were offensive generated, not the full 26, right? So you look at that and you go, that's a win. That's a win. Unfortunately, much like last week, the Bengals played much better. We'll talk about what we're encouraged about, discouraged about, all that kind of stuff. The Bengals played much better this week, particularly on offense in a lot of different ways. But you mentioned a couple of errors late, right? You had the chase penalty that killed a drive. You had the Mike Gesicki drop. I don't know if the sun was in his eyes on that. I don't really know what happened. First down. I mean, that's what was it? An 8-yard, 9-yard play, and you're dialed in nicely. He brings that in right in front of that sideline there. Inexplicable drop there. You had Yoshi, who had the touchdown and all that kind of stuff. He had a drop, as you said, late. Just critical mistakes late where, and then of course the Burrow fumble that ended up being a touchdown the other way. You had the blueprint, at least how you handle the Chiefs offense and how to get a surefire win. But then when it came time at the critical junctures, the late parts of this game, the Bengals made a handful of big mistakes. And that's why when we say, let's point out the officiating, that just gets accentuated because of the Bengals' own mistakes that they made. That's really, truly where, I mean, you can talk about the Anthony penalty and all that kind of stuff. This is truly where I think this game was won and lost. The McPherson missed extra point. You could debate the importance of that one too. A lot of blame to go around.
I mean, the most important play of all is probably just Joe Burrow's strip sack fumble recovering for a touchdown. Like the end of the third quarter had Cam Taylor-Britt making one of the most impressive interceptions any of us have ever seen. The Bengals were up by, I want to say, 5 at the time. It was 22-17 entering the fourth quarter, and then the ensuing drive, the Chiefs not only get the ball back, but they're in the end zone. So it's almost like the interception never even happened, and they just scored on a quick touchdown, even though, what happened. Everything in the fourth quarter went the Chiefs' way. And that's why in this particular matchup and rivalry, the fourth quarter is where every game has basically been won. The only time where the Bengals, I feel like, were down early in the game and then ended, like, that happened in the first AFC Championship game. The opposite kind of happened in that 2022 regular season game where the Bengals were in control early on, but then they kept their composure and had a really quality fourth quarter and basically ran the clock out. They had the chance to do that again this game, and that hasn't been a commonality, hasn't been the common game flow and game script of this rivalry, but that was the case this time, and it went against my expectation. I figured that if the Bengals offense were to come alive in this game, would have been happening after the second half. Maybe they, maybe have gotten kickstarted a little bit, but it was the Chiefs who needed that little kick in the butt in the second half, and they ended up doing enough in the fourth quarter. And like you said, the fourth quarter is just filled with just critical errors for the Bengals. And, we can talk about the refs all we want, but that's ultimately what the coaches are going to point to as to why they lost.
This brings up, again, just to reiterate about the blueprint that the Bengals had in place, at least from an offensive stat line perspective for the Kansas City Chiefs. What they gave up and turnovers forced. I mean, they forced another fumble. You had 2 interceptions. You had a third interception that ended up being negated. I mean, the Bengals defense came up big in this one. And the pass, they've got, at least yardage wise, one of the top passing defenses. Their run defense is kind of a mess, and I think a big chunk of that is because of the injuries on the interior now. But look, you look at this too. When I talk about the 3 turnovers they forced on of the Kansas City offense, man, I mean, they got 10 points. So 10 points off turnovers is pretty good in a way. But when you talk about not getting points off of every turnover that they netted, and then one turnover, they turn right back around and it becomes 7 the other way, all of a sudden those points off turnovers really doesn't amount to all that much in a contest like this. So that's another critical area that the Bengals need to start shoring up and kind of have that foot on the throat mentality. Like, man, the fact that Cam Taylor-Britt interception was essentially wasted, and that play, that huge play, that sideline lifting play, that it was wasted a few plays later, and not only just wasted, not just punted away, 7 for the other team. That is an absolute momentum and whatever, momentum killing thing. So again, you like the turnovers, you like getting 10 points off of turnovers, but it really doesn't amount to much when you actually deep dive into the nuances as to what happened after some of those turnovers.
This is why playing the Chiefs it's in its own category. It's why I think Zach Taylor's most aggressive moments have come against the Chiefs, going back all the way to 2021, where he went for, on 3rd and 27, a go route on the sideline. He consistently goes for 4th down. The game's first big play was a 4th down conversion to Mike Gesicki, got him inside the red zone. Unfortunately, that drive ended in a field goal for them. But even still, like, the Bengals did convert a Patrick Mahomes interception into a touchdown. That happened on Akeem Davis Gaither's interception, and then Andre Yosevich found the end zone a couple of plays later. So you could do things right against the Chiefs, but ultimately it's almost like the Chiefs always have some type of 7 points that they just magically find, and it's like you have to treat every lead that you have like you're also down by an additional 7 points. That's the reality of playing the Chiefs. Regardless of what you think about the refs and the officiating and conspiracies, it's just what it is, right? And that's why I think the Bengals consistently against this team are much more aggressive minded, and it could fare well for them to have that approach against, I don't know, the 30 other teams that they face, but at least they understand the assignment and they just have to execute next time.
So let's talk about individuals, position groups, etc., that we felt either excelled, didn't excel, that sort of thing. And I want to start with the offensive line. You look at the tackles. Orlando Brown had a holding penalty that you kind of go, what was that, a hold? I don't know. You look at Trent Brown on the other side. He had a false start. There was a sack given up early in the game to Karlaftis, but that was kind of more of a second effort. Burrow kind of moved around a little bit, and then Karlaftis kind of adjusted there. So I don't know if that was a true, it wasn't a true beat off of, the line and just, absolutely dominated type of thing. So your impressions of the offensive line, kind of some ups and downs on the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen ever since 2022 that Chris Jones and the interior will get the best of Cordell Volson and those guys from time to time. Volson was probably the lone weakness of the offensive line, but that can happen. I think Orlando Brown continues to look well. He looked really well in week 1 against the Patriots, and that pretty much showed up again. Trent Brown had a much better, more clean game. I think he really showed out on the second Yoshi touchdown where it was 4th down. And Burrow had at least like 3 or 4 seconds to go. And he was blocking Chris Jones one-on-one, so he handled him pretty well. There's going to be instances where, Brown is a little bit flat-footed or his lack of athleticism shows up, but when it comes to just withstanding power and using all 6'8", 380 pounds of him, he's going to show up sometimes. And I think Alex Kappa played much better too, and he was someone that we talked about needing to play better off of last week. So he looked a lot better. He looked, I think, just he wasn't exposed as much in pass protection. So yeah, 2 straight weeks of the offensive line not really being a storyline. And I know people are going to look at sacks, and Burrow was sacked 3 times. He was sacked 3 times last week. That happens sometimes when Burrow's kind of feeling himself, and especially when he has negative pocket presence like he had back in week 1. But I think the 3 sacks that were official, I think only 2 were counted against the offensive line. I think it was Burrow's strip sack that was basically at the line of scrimmage. He was scrambling outside of the pocket anyway, so that hardly even counts as a sack allowed by them. So really solid job by the offensive line, and that hasn't always been said when the Bengals go to Arrowhead.
Yeah, I don't think that. Yeah, I don't look at them and say that was the problem necessarily. I want to talk about, what you saw out of the other wide receivers. No T. Higgins again. You mentioned Jamar Chase had the light statistical output, at least on the stat sheet there. Yoshi getting into the end zone. And, in one play we didn't really mention, you had the play, and you can kind of put it on both Burrow and Irwin. It was early in the game. I think it was in the second quarter. Burrow rolls out to the right and finds Irwin, who's tightly covered, drifting towards the sideline of the end zone there. Throws a pretty solid dot, and the defender swipes, but it looks like he missed it. The ball kind of hits off of Irwin because obviously that swipe was just boom and distracted him, but still hits him off the face mask. And then also to boot, you kind of look at that replay, you go, why didn't Burrow just run that? And then that was a drive that ended in a field goal, if I'm not mistaken. So, that issue there. But if you look at the wide receivers, some good, some not good. Burton getting into the mix and making a big play, though, that has to, feel pretty good for not only the fans, but the coaching staff seeing him out there and making the play that, of course, kind of a predictable route, but it works for him.
To put it lightly, it really does feel like it's Jamar Chase and an island of misfit toys, because again, starting Trenton Irwin is just not wise in terms of just maximizing his ability. I know that obviously, Burrow had space to run in, but when the ball goes right at your head, you have to at least put up your arms to catch it. That was not a good moment from him. And it's just like, it was reminiscent of that past AFC Championship game where he had an extended role and the Chiefs just didn't respect him and he couldn't do anything really against them. And then you have arguably the most interesting player on the team right now is Yoshi, because outside of the red zone, he looks lost and he's not gaining a lot of separation. He had that critical drop. Once you get him in the end zone, he becomes a great receiver. I think he's got like 20 career receptions and 6 touchdowns. That level of efficiency is bonkers for a player who's only played like 20 or so career games or whatever. I don't know what to make of him yet, to be honest with you. I don't know if his role is going to change once T. Higgins comes out. I don't know if the types of routes that he's going to be asked to run is going to be any different. I don't know if he's playing necessarily a little bit out of position compared to where he was in training camp. And maybe that's the same with Irwin too. But I think there's a lot more that Yoshi can continue to show them playing outside of the slot. Because again, playing in the slot was like a surprising development, I think, for a lot of people when he was taking starting reps inside there with, Higgins on the outside and Irwin on the outside. And now he's kind of on the boundary again where people thought he was going to be more comfortable, and he hasn't really showed that much yet in 2 games. So I think these 2 games have proven the value that T. Higgins still has. And until Jermaine Burton gets out there for a full game, and obviously, that 47-yard reception was great separation, stacked the cornerback, great ball from Burrow, leads to one of the biggest explosive plays of the season so far, maybe the biggest explosive play of the season. But until he sees like an extended role without T. Higgins, this group is still Jamar Chase and pretty much not a lot else.
I'm curious, I think we all are, to see what Burton can do with both Chase and Higgins out there healthy. I think, if you get those 3 on the field, which is the original vision, despite kind of Burton being in the coach's doghouse a little bit. I think it just makes things that much more complex for a defense. And you felt Higgins being gone in this one a lot. You felt it for week 1 too, but you felt it this week. I think that would have just added a completely different dimension there. We all hoped he would have been a late add, but just wasn't there. We'll see if he's ready to go here, especially with the extra day with the Monday night game coming here. Hopefully that bodes well for him. I want to talk about the tight ends, and this is kind of going to go a little bit into our next thing in just a few minutes, which is the encouraged, discouraged type of elements to this game. I thought there was a lot to like from the tight end group. Drew Sample was a factor early. You had Gesicki, who, Mike Gesicki giveth and Mike Gesicki taketh away. He's the guy that he'll come up with a big play. And, they said he dropped the touchdown last week. Now they're kind of saying maybe it was a touchdown. NFL can't figure out what a catch is still. But regardless, a couple of nice catches from him, had the drop. And then you had Eric All contributing as well in a number of different facets. So I think there were some good moments from the tight end group. And at one point, they were way ahead of the wide receiver group in terms of production, receptions, yards, et cetera, in this game.
Yeah, I want to relay some stats that Ben Baby also posted on Twitter. 151 yards, like you said, is the most in the Joe Burrow era for tight ends, and they ran 70 routes, which is also, I think, that ties a career high in the Burrow era. It goes all the way back to the second week of the 2020 season. And then as far as using 12 personnel, which has a running back and 2 tight ends in the field, that was for 31% of their plays, and that's the second highest rate in the Zach Taylor era. And we talked about how the receivers aren't necessarily reliable on the outside, and that led to, I think, this type of a game plan where last week the Ravens had a lot of success with Isaiah Likely against the Chiefs defense. There was some clear scouting that was going on there. Obviously, the first big play went to Gesicki over the middle. This was the Bengals this was the Bengals identifying a clear weakness on the Chiefs defense and exploiting it with this newfound personnel that they have. And obviously Gesicki was going to be involved as a receiver, especially with T. Higgins out. But I think the most pleasant surprise was to see Eric All, used down the field as a receiver, because we knew he was going to have some type of a role with blocking, but utilizing his athleticism to get down the field and be a receiver. And I think his longest reception, was 19 yards. So seeing that verticality of his game being utilized was really promising to see. Drew Sample continues to be Drew Sample. He's just that underneath guy who can maybe get some yards after the catch. And I think he was like the first 2 targets of the game, which was kind of interesting. But yeah, like just seeing these guys just used in ways that matches their skill sets and utilize the middle of the field when you're not gaining any separation from the boundary. That is a good recognition of where your team strengths are with the current roster and who's healthy and who's not. And also, what the defense does take away and what they don't, because obviously bracketing Chase and just locking in on him was going to be a focal point, and that's why he didn't really see the ball that much. And those other guys just ended up being open and making plays. Now, you would have wanted to see Gesicki make one more play that would have potentially helped win the game, but 7 receptions for 91 yards is hardly anything to scoff at.
It is, and you like to see that group stepping up, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. You like to see that group stepping up with, the absence of Higgins and the bracketing of Chase. That's the kind of thing that needs to happen, right? I mean, you got to have that. So let's switch on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, I think the back end of the defense, allowing just 151 yards, getting 2 interceptions, and then you can kind of throw the linebackers in that a little bit as well. Pratt forcing the fumble. Some said it was Pratt, some said it was Rankins. I mean, however you want to slice it. The back end of that defense played well. Cam Taylor-Britt, amazing interception, 151 yards passing, as I said. 151 yards passing and 2 interceptions of Patrick Mahomes is what you need. I mean, that gets you the win every time. So the back end of that defense played pretty well. Trey Hendrickson continues to impress. Bengals still, they've got issues on the interior, John, and they got to get more pass rush from someone else besides him.
Where's it going to come from, though? Like, that's at this point, we don't know, because the Rankins hamstring injury is very crucial here, because I think he's been close in terms of getting home. He just hasn't really gotten there. And sacks have never really been the big story with him. Remember, he had 3 of his 6 sacks last year against the Bengals alone. So he's never really been Aaron Donald in that regard, but providing chaos has always been something that he's been good at. And I think he's been on the cusp of doing that, but just hasn't really gotten home yet and hasn't really impacted a lot of pockets yet. But yeah, it really was just Hendrickson taking advantage of a mismatch. And there were going to be mismatches on both sides of the trenches here for both teams, right? The Chiefs' interior offensive line, did well in terms of pushing against the Bengals' weak defensive tackles, but Trey Hendrickson against a rookie and Kingsley Sumatea, I think he got Sumatea benched after maybe it was a sack or some type of a holding call. And of course, the story with Hendrickson is that his main pass rushing move, he tries a little, rip around the outside, and offensive tackles who are most of the time larger than him or on top of him. Sometimes it looks like they're holding him or choke holding him. And there were a couple of instances where that was definitely the case. But for the most part, Hendrickson, in terms of doing that move, he's not really going to get that holding call that much, just because that's the nature of what the move is. And the refs are going to allow that to play on. But I think he was just winning so constantly that, Sumate was just trying to keep up with him. And at some point, like, he just kind of let his technique kind of go by the wayside. And that's where the holding scheme in. And that's where I think at the end of the game, where it was Wanya Morris in there for Sumate at left tackle, and Wanya Morris didn't mess around and just went bam right to his face. And that's why he got the illegal hands to the face. So he was putting both left tackles in hell for most of the game. And it was impressive because obviously Mahomes has great pocket presence and he's able to evade, and he did that many times, but collapsing the pocket in a very direct path and form, that's how he got both of his sacks. And there was just no nonsense, no BS around it. He was going around the edge and he was finishing when he needed to. So phenomenal game from him. And I think Sam Hubbard played better too, but it was nice to see, I think, Joseph Ossai snaps triple from last week. And right. I don't know if he won that much as a pass rusher, but you did see him also do his part in terms of collapsing the pocket, which is more than what, Sam Hubbard probably could have provided in those certain situations.
Yeah, and that's kind of been, I know poor Joseph Ossai is remembered for other things in that 22 AFC Championship game, but I mean, they've relied on him because of what he can do, and what they like to show on defense, what they like to do on defense against the Chiefs specifically. Osai's been, when healthy, he's been in there and getting more snaps. I agree. I think the pass rush improved from the week prior. But a little more consistency aside from someone not named Trey Hendrickson would be my preference. And then, of course, the Bengals just have to get more healthy. They have to get healthier on the interior of the defensive line, because they are just continuing to be down players in that regard. But overall, again, to me, I mean, the overall impression that I took away from this was the Bengals, if you look at it from position groups, if you look at it from specific players, that sort of thing, they did enough to win this game. It was more errors at critical moments and at critical points on the field, whether that was early in the miss on the Trenton Irwin touchdown catch / Burrow run in, the late fumble 6, the drops late in the game. It was more just key errors in key moments, not so much overall poor output like it was in week one. That's kind of my overarching impression of this one.
No, I think if you would have told me this time last week that the Bengals were able to generate explosive plays, they're able to diversify their offense with more under center, more pre-snap motion. By the way, their pre-snap motion, I think, almost tripled in terms of percentage. And they were able to defensively have trust in their safeties, confuse Mahomes, and tackle better. If you tell me all those things happen, I would have said the Bengals would have had a really good chance of winning the game, if not winning the game. And the fact that they came within 1 point and it came down to the officials and it came down to the last drive, sometimes it's going to happen in your favor. Sometimes it's going to happen in the other teams, regardless of who you play. So definite strides were made in this game. And I think that's why being 0-2 now is like, you're in familiar territory. So it's like, it's not the worst thing in the world because you've just been through this before. But also, like, if this was just a discouraging loss like last week, you'd be feeling a lot worse. And yeah, like, they played the Chiefs pretty well and they have them figured out at some point, but they made significant progress in key areas that you needed to see from them because week one was so daunting in that sense. So it did seem like instead of having to wait 4 or 5 weeks until like the light switch clicked, this was actually just 2 weeks until the lights flicked. And now it seems like, yeah, like we know who we are now. And once players comes back, it'll be better. Yeah.
And I think the benefit of playing a team like the Chiefs so early forces you to really lock in more, right? I mean, not that, look, everybody's human. I don't mean that to say, poor coaching jobs or anything like that. Just the reality is there are teams that I don't know, maybe you take a little more seriously, maybe you don't. I mean, players speak, coach speak, because you treat every game the same and you try to, but early in the season, you're facing the Chiefs. You're already 0-1. You had a stinker of a first game, especially on offense, and you're going into this one. I mean, it forces you. It's like, instead of maybe a pop quiz or a midterm, it's your final exam type of thing. How you prep a little differently sometimes. And this maybe was a blessing in disguise, despite the loss. This maybe was a blessing in disguise for the Bengals to force them to prep early, get those, whatever, the rust, the shakiness, the jitters, all that stuff that you saw in week one, get it out and be ready to play. I think there are still a lot of areas to clean up, like these clutch moments where you got to come in. The Bengals that we knew from 21 and 22, those are the clutch plays that they were coming down with and getting these types of wins. They haven't fully been going their way this year. That's something that they need to clean up. But for the most part, I think overall they cleaned up a lot of things from the week prior.
So what are we saying? We have to play the Chiefs week 1 now? Or maybe the preseason,
Yeah, exactly. We're going to talk about what was encouraging and discouraging and then hop on out of here. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, part of the Believe Network, the Believe podcast network. And we're part of the Believe in Cincy podcast channel ourselves, talking football with Bengal Jim and friends, 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin, as well as Matt and Willie No Ball with the coach Matt Minnick and the great Willie Lutz. You can get all of those shows. We're trying to pepper you with content all throughout the week from a variety of different shows, variety of different hosts on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. So you're going to want to go resubscribe to the Believe in Cincy podcast channel to get all of those shows. We were blessed, last couple of weeks, we had a couple of big Believe people on our shows. We had Joe Valerio, former Chiefs offensive lineman and Believe in Chiefs podcast host, as well as the Believe in Bengals host, Solomon Wilcots, week prior. And week before that, we had Eric All. So it's great to see him getting more time and doing some things. So go check out all of the shows, be it from us or the rest, on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, and get it through your favorite streamer. Subscribe, leave us a review. If you like the video side of things, you can get to our YouTube channel underneath John. There is an Orange and Black Insider Show icon. Click that, click the subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when we go live and when new content is available. And what else am I missing? Go down the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. We stream there, Twitter accounts, all that kind of stuff. Of course, keep it to cincyjungle.com, and where my guys killing it, John over at A to Z Sports, talking writing up some Bengals stuff, AFC North stuff, etc. Okay. Shameless self-promotion out of the way, John. Let's talk about what we were encouraged and discouraged about, and maybe some other elements that are encouraging and discouraging. I think the most obvious here is what we were just talking about in the last segment, which was just improved play across the board. The Bengals, even though there were moments in clutch, there were issues in clutch moments, I still think they showed up to play. I still think they had an intensity. I still think that they had a game that was a tough game, that they seemingly had won. I think all of those are true. And like you said, there were some prevalent issues on offense the week prior. Many of those were cleaned up despite not having your full arsenal of weapons again, namely T. Higgins. So in that regard, they showed up on defense, playing well against Patrick Mahomes. So improved play across the board as a whole. So that just in general has to be encouraging.
Yeah, I think the defense deserves the majority of the credit here for it was interesting when that Davis Gaither interception happened. That wasn't the first time he was on the field, I don't think. And it wasn't the last time either. The Bengals went more into like these 4-3, like the classic Marvin Lewis defense, right? The 4-3 defense with 4 down linemen, 3 linebackers. And that was such an interesting wrinkle that I don't know has been common in the Lou Rumo's time coaching against the Chiefs, but it makes sense in terms of just having numbers in the box to defend against the run, while also having 7 quality athletes drop back in coverage. And obviously Mahomes wasn't expecting it. He completely missed Davis Gaither there. So that little wrinkle was encouraging to see. And I think Lou has more, again, trust and confidence in the personnel that he has on defense to win games like this. And Cam Taylor-Britt, we have to shout him out too for, talking the talk and walking the walk, because again, he said what was true. Xavier Worthy is very fast, and if you don't get your hands on him, that's how he can beat you. Well, he did get his hands on him. He basically covered that route to perfection. And even if he didn't haul it in with just 4 fingers or whatever, he still would have deflected the ball away. It was a phenomenal play by him and a great bounce back moment after for whatever reason, it looked like the Bengals were in cover 2 and he slowed up a little bit on the route.
Yeah.
And Mahomes threw a perfect ball and there was no safety help over the top and he just missed that play. So it was a great bounce back moment for him. And I think for the most part, he had a really good game and just tackling better, honestly. I think Geno Stone, Sam Hubbard, all improved in that regard. And, those two were, unfortunately low lights against the Patriots and as far as, defending the run and everything. But Mahomes didn't really push the ball down the field aside from that touchdown. I think the Bengals kept everything kind of in front of them, and that's what led to kind of an inefficient performance. So that combined again with an offense that found out ways of how to exploit some mismatches with pre-snap motion, go under center a lot more, and find ways to target vacancies down the field. All that put together was all very encouraging for sure.
So I mentioned this earlier too. I think I'm encouraged by the implementation and usage of the tight ends and players like Eric All. I think Gesicki needs to kind of he obviously needs to continue to be involved, but that drop at the end there, I know drops happen, they just happen, but again, it's just one of those critical moment type of plays and really a head scratcher, like what just happened type of thing. Overall, I think the tight ends obviously were big contributors. You mentioned the stats via Ben Baby of ESPN earlier. So I'm encouraged. And I'm encouraged because, again, when you don't have – when Jamar Chase is bracketed and or not having the game that we're accustomed to, when T. Higgins is out of the lineup, you're not getting too much out of somebody like Trenton Irwin, that sort of thing. These are the kind of players that need to – step up, sustain drives for you, make some plays, and be supplemental weapons that are factors in a game like this.
100%. And I think you would have wanted a little bit more. I'm not going to say they abandoned the run, but I think they found something that was working with Chase Brown and having Drew Sample be kind of a lead blocker out of shotgun. And that was something that the Chiefs were having trouble kind of stopping, and you would have liked to see, especially because the game script was never really out of reach, you would have liked to see that maybe run a couple more times. And just the fact that he wasn't really on the field as much as Zach Moss, that might be an indication of just how the depth chart is at the moment and how much more trust they may have in Moss in terms of pass protection and just being on the field for passing plays in general. But yeah, all of that, again, it's something that I think you needed to see. As far as also, I wanted to mention on defense again, I've never seen a forced fumble like what Jermaine Pratt did, where he was just feet were locked into the turf, right? And he just locked eyes with the ball and he just sent a left hook. It wasn't like you've seen Peanut Tillman kind of come from behind and punch the ball out. You've seen Jermaine Pratt force fumbles before, but never before have I ever seen a football player stand just straight up, just lock eyes with the ball and just send a left hook right at a moving target at the ball and then pop it out. That was the most unique forced fumble I've ever seen. But if we want to talk about discouraging, I think ball security has to be something to note for the Bengals, because the first play, Drew Sample fumbled and the Chiefs almost recovered, which would have set the game on a wholly different trajectory. But as far as Joe Burrow, that strip sack obviously wasn't ideal. I think there was a couple of muff snaps as well from Burrow. There's one on a QB sneak where he kind of mishandled it a little bit. And I don't know if that has anything to do with the wrist. It might have just been a one-off thing, but that was a little bit a little uneasy considering that's what he's got going on and he's still kind of managing it. So as far as throwing the ball, he looked completely fine. And I never really had any, doubts about that, but that was a little discouraging to see in terms of just it led to the biggest play of the game, in my opinion.
That's right. Yeah. And that, that fumbled snap, stalled things out. Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point. Yeah. In terms of other, I'm going to sound kind of like a flip-flopper here because I said I was encouraged at the overall play, encouraged at the improvement that we saw from week to week, especially rising to the occasion and potentially almost getting a win here. But moral victories are just that, right? And the bottom line is the Bengals kind of did the non-Joe Burrow era Bengals thing, which is clutch moments, fourth quarter, you're in the game, you have a chance to control this game, and you didn't do it. And you didn't do it via drops. You didn't do it via penalties. You didn't do it via a fumble by your quarterback, like you mentioned. Just mistakes. And again, improved play all over the place. These clutch moment mistakes is what doomed them. And I guess there's a good news with that it's still early in the season. You can kind of clean that up. It's just uncharacteristic, though, when you've got a Joe Burrow team, a Jamar Chase team that are making these kinds of mistakes late in games and against the Chiefs. It's just uncharacteristic. Kind of tying into that a little bit was the settling for field goals a couple more times, than when you're deep in the red zone there. I don't know. That to me, this isn't the second or third year of the Joe Burrow era. We're now way into this thing, and these kinds of mistakes late in games against marquee teams on the road, just you got to shore them up.
Yeah, man, it's not a common thing, like you said, for this team, and unfortunately, it's more common this time of the year, this time of the schedule, and thankfully for them, like they seem to be able to kind of figure things out by the end. But yeah, like it's all comes down to the fourth quarter, and that's always been the case with this game. It sounds very cliche, but I think it displayed itself pretty straightforward on Sunday, and just making just simple plays that can extend drives, that can keep the ball in your quarterback's hands, and make sure that the other quarterback is on the sideline. That's just, you can do so much against Mahomes throughout the game. You can do so much to tie Andy Reid's hands behind his back in terms of being a play caller. But if you give them just an ounce of space to breathe, they will do everything in their power to make you pay for it. And that's just another lesson that they learned.
And this is one I don't know how to feel about, encouraged or discouraged. Again, because you can sit here and say, well, let's not talk about moral victories. That's dumb. That doesn't mean anything. And the bottom line is the Bengals are 0-2, right? But let's look at the scope of the AFC North right now. The Steelers, who everybody thought were going to be pretty poor this year, are 2-0, right? And they're atop the division. The Browns are 1-1, and the Bengals and the Ravens are 0-2. The Ravens suffering a crazy loss to the Raiders on their home field. I think, if you talk about two of the biggest, bracket busters or survival league busters in back-to-back weeks, it would be the Bengals and the Ravens. More than likely. So I don't know, man. On one hand, I'm like, well, the two teams that everybody kind of thought would be at the top, the Bengals and the Ravens, are right now at 0-2. And you kind of have faith that they're going to turn things around, particularly with the Bengals showing improvement. I don't know how much improvement the Ravens did or didn't show this last week, but I don't know. There's semblances of both. It's like, man, 0-2 start again. They're in the basement again. They got to climb their way out again. But it would seem that down there in the basement with them is a good Ravens team. And, if they get things going in the right direction, they can make some hay in this division pretty quickly here. And you got two winnable games coming down the pipe.
I would be very curious to see what the live odds are for who wins the AFC North, because I just can't imagine the Steelers are the favorites right now. Like, that's just it's so funny how the AFC North, we all believe that it's the best division in football, and that's why Hard Knocks is doing the season-long thing. But not even the AFC North is immune to the wackiness that the first 2 weeks of the season provided. It's a common thing to just continue with your priors through the first 2 weeks, and everything kind of settles into its form after that. But it's so funny how, of course, the Bengals and Ravens are the two winless teams. The Browns took advantage of a Jaguars offense that doesn't know what the hell they're doing, even at home. And the Steelers somehow, scumbag their way to 2 wins, because that's what they do. And even if they don't have everything kind of going right for them, they find ways to win, and they find ways to get near, 9 or 10 wins by the end of the season. That just doesn't seem to be changing. So it's always these first 2 weeks around the league where some wackiness does happen, and it just happens to affect the AFC North this year.
I'm just very confused about how I feel and conflicted about how I feel with the AFC North and the state of things. The Bengals have the Commanders this week, the Ring of Honor game on Monday night, so that'll be fun. That seems the Commanders, I believe, are 0-2, so that seems to be a pretty winnable game. Then you got the Panthers, who are a mess. They are, I think, 0-2 as well. They just benched their number 1 overall pick and Bryce Young, and guess who is set to start against the Cincinnati Bengals in week 4 at this point in time, and that would be none other than Mr. Andy Dalton. And man, what would that be? Technically his third start since leaving Cincinnati? Fourth. Oh yeah, I mean, good Lord.
Third start, but fourth appearance, because he came off the bench for the Bears. Yeah,
he started for the Bears, and then he started for the Bears and then left with an injury, and that's when Fields came in.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So he
I had that
started,
completely mixed
and
around.
then what was it? The year prior, he was with the Cowboys, and he started
Yeah.
and beat the Bengals pretty soundly. And then I think this would be number 3 at least here. So yeah, I mean, time is a flat circle, right? Just it's funny, but at any rate, these seem to be 2 winnable games. The Bengals can get to 500 pretty quickly here if things go right. And then you start getting into the meat of the schedule, the divisional games and that sort of thing, which obviously mean a lot. So Bengals lose a heartbreaker, did a lot to and enough technically to win the game, but also just didn't show up in the clutch. We'll see what happens down the pike. Hopefully they can start turning things around. Again, this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, part of the Believe in Cincy podcast network. So go get that on your favorite audio streamer. Check us out on YouTube. Follow the Twitter accounts. Do all the things. Keep it to cincyjungle.com and A to Z sports.com, where John's doing his thing. John, we will be back this week with more Commanders previews and hopefully we do have some special guests coming on, but we're working on a couple of others. So we'll see what we can do there. But we'll have some fun. I appreciate you coming on and bringing the knowledge, my friend.
Yep. And my mic drop was going to be the Andy Dalton nugget, not to get too ahead of ourselves because there's a very important game in week 3. But I think I was more surprised at the fact that Dalton didn't end up playing against them last year because it's the only year that this hasn't happened. But if you guys do remember, though, it was the last time that the Bengals played Andy Dalton. He was with the Saints in 2022. And that game was largely looked at like the true turning point for that Bengals team in New Orleans. And obviously that same stadium where Burrow and Chase won the national championship, and Burrow and Chase connected on a touchdown that kind of kickstarted, I think, like a 10-game winning streak to end that season. It would be kind of not poetic because there's not a ton of similarities there, but the two haven't connected on a touchdown yet, right? And you just kind of feel like it's going to come. And for their sake, it probably should happen this week instead of against the Panthers, who are just an absolute dumpster fire. But yeah, it is kind of funny how Andy Dalton leaves and he just keeps coming back.
The ghost returns, right? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in live, for tuning in after the fact. We appreciate it, and we'll be back with more stuff for you on this show and the others on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. Take care.